Hey everyone, I'm Taylor DeBray. I'll just tell you a little bit about myself. I live in Eagle Mountain, Utah, which is just about 30 minutes southeast of Lehi, Utah. Also, Saratoga Springs is about 20 minutes from us, just a little bit more central if you know where that's at. This week I will be covering progressive image loading for week 6. It was really interesting to study and to learn about and how we can apply this into our future websites and programs that we are building currently and in the future. With that being said, let's go ahead and just highlight over what is progressive image loading. Progressive image loading is a technique to smartly load the images of your program or application on demand by using small placeholders while the original image is being lazy loaded. When it finishes, it does a soft transition from the placeholder to the original picture. So really it's just replacing that image just at a faster rate. So there's a lot of pros and cons to it, and we'll move to that part now. What are the benefits? The following are some of just the benefits that I found or I could think of. Saves unnecessary bandwidth. It creates a faster loading time, higher performance. Images load on a faster view load or view source. Supports any type of image. You could do a GIF, you could do JPEG, PNG. Supports all those image formats that you would think of for any large enterprise or small enterprise that they're uploading. I would recommend any JPEG or .png. PNG is usually better because it's not going to have as much security risk or people not able to view it. Certain banks or enterprises or financial institutions will not be able to use JPEG as they block most JPEGs on sites or emails. Just an idea if you are using lazy load or slow load or progressive image loading within an invitation or marketing emails. Anyway, supports responsive images. So the source set and size attributes are very responsive. Supports CSS background images, so it won't affect anything else. There's different types of bytes that you can do, such as the small, which is 1300 bytes, or JavaScript, which is 445 bytes of CSS, or there's minified. Any CSS reveal effect can be applied, so there's no limitation on that. Any CSS reveal can be applied. Again, like I said, any CSS will apply what you have for that effect. No external dependencies. Works with any framework. Works in all modern browsers, Internet 10 and up usually. It does also work in Internet 8. I did test that. So Internet Explorer 8, 10, 11, Internet Edge, Firefox, Google Chrome, Opera, and that's all the ones that I could test and look into. It also is progressively enhanced to work with older browsers, especially. I've seen this especially with Internet Explorer 11. My company itself uses progressive image loading, or also known as lazy load imaging. It's a great process so you don't overwhelm your website or server with these images that you're loading. What are the cons from using progressive image loading? Simple but very complicated to implement on a small program. I'll teach you a little bit how to do that, and we'll look at a couple of examples how to do this. It does require JavaScript and CSS to be implemented. The only con that I could really think of that's not maybe the best user experience is blurry images. Blurry images can be great for artistic effects. It does, don't get me wrong, it does speed up, but I just don't think blurry images are going to be the future. I think, if anything, loading signals or faster response times to load these images as blank or as just a gray area. You can do this with a text wrap and other different ways around the image itself. We'll explain that a little bit more. How to implement progressive image loading. First, there must be a load the CSS and JavaScript. Second of all, it can be placed anywhere on the page, but typically in the CSS, it's right at the top at the header. So you'll put it inside the header area, and the JavaScript is loaded just before the closing body tag. Third, add the following JavaScript: link relation, style sheet, href, css progressive image dot min.css. So that's just calling that style sheet, and you'll see here the script's source. They're pulling that script, so the JavaScript is knowing to pull this progressive image JavaScript. It's just going to apply to replace these images faster, and we have to have this to be able to really do that. Fourth, the simple progressive image is a link to the full-size graphic. Around the preview, note the progressive and replace classes on the link on the preview class on the image. Here's the href, full.jpg, class progressive replace, image source tiny.jpg, class equals preview, alternate equals image, and then you're going to close that href. If an image loading or JavaScript fails, a blurred version of the preview image can be clicked, and it will bring up the full image. So when you click on it, it'll actually, on the same tab, it will open up, and you'll see the full image, not as blurry anymore. It will show the original image. So it can't hurt anything if people click on it. But again, I don't think it's the best user interface to do that. If you require a responsive image to remain a real link, you use the href to address the data href attribute with the large image URL. Here's an example below. The href http site.com data type full.jpg class progressive replace, and then just that image source tag, and then they assign a class equals preview, then alternate equals image, and then you'll close that href again. Let me go ahead and change to a different screen. This website is kind of where I got my basis from to really follow it and how this works. If I just refresh this page really quick, you'll see that this is using lazy load or slow load. You'll see these images are blur, and then it focuses back in to be the full one. Like this one was saying earlier, if you click on the image, it will then bring up the full picture. I just don't want people to get confused. You can't click out of it. You actually have to back out. But again, it will slow load these images from blurry to that. And what I was telling you was, like I was saying, just a basic example. The page must load the CSS and JavaScript, and here is the link relation style sheet and href that you can put in as an example to pull this progressive image loading. This is just the example for just the blur. We will talk about lazy loading in just a second. We'll get to that. But I just wanted to cover a little bit here. Again, you'll see what this is doing is if people do click on it, it will still bring up, like I said, that image like I was showing you earlier. The next piece below is just to replace that image inside the JavaScript to then load that image to clear through the JavaScript. Another example that we'll move to is here. We'll go ahead and rerun this. You'll see these images all are going through the blur process to then load. We'll just go through a little bit of code here as we see this. So here again, before his pre-code, he calls that style sheet. Right here, you'll see right here he's calling that CSS file, and he's also calling that JavaScript file. And then he's just going through and giving you instructions really of how to implement this. You'll go ahead and then add that progressive code here to be able to add those images. And here's that href that we were talking about earlier about the full progressive, and he's pulling, when you click on it, it will then bring up the full image. And then here's the preview that he's saying. It'll go to the preview, that black border around the image is what that preview is. And then below that we have here, it'll replace the image and show the full image instead of the blur. And then we'll go into the CSS like we said at the top. It's in the header, so you'll see the primary, and here's where we start that CSS progressive. He has 4 different sections here that he makes them a little bit more complicated, but the big thing is here, we'll walk through this little by little. He first calls the image CSS, where he wants the image. Obviously, it's relative. He wants it to be a block, no overflow, no outline. And then he's calling the replace. This is the bigger part that we were talking about. The a.progressive, not .replace. So it won't replace when you click on the image. That's the part, the preview. He doesn't want it to be shown unless the image is clicked on. Here again is where he's setting the CSS for that, and then below he is saying blur the image. You'll see here the filter, blur, and then he's transformed that to be a scale to 1.5, so he's scaling that image to what he wants it to be set to. He does this with every single image that he has here. Again, and then he's calling it will change. That's what he's calling for. It will change the opacity from blur to then reveal, and it will ease out, which means it'll just make it easier to see. That's just the basic how to transform the blur to the clear image there. We will then go back to my PowerPoint presentation really quick. So like I said, here's the example that he was given. It was blurry, and then when he let it load, it cleared up to be the full picture. Here's a couple examples of what lazy load and progressive image loading does. So you'll see here you'll see this if I reshare again my page. All of his images, some of them, the images are just set to blur, and then they clear up. Here's the example that I gave exactly. So if I just refresh this, it will be blurry for a second, but it then clears up. This is the easiest way that I've found to do this. He has a couple of different options that you can improve upon, but he does give directly the instructions that I gave to you guys to set this up for your own programs. And here's just another secondary example. You'll see that image again. It's blurry, and now it's clear. We'll run this. So here's the HTML, like I was saying. If you rerun this, these images are now going through lazy load or the image blur. Like you just saw that one momentarily was blurry for a second, and now they're fully there. And same with this bottom footer image. Similar ideas to progressive image loading is lazy load images. Let me just move that. Lazy loading images means loading images on websites faster. That is after the full content is fully loaded, or even conditionally on when they appear in the browser viewport. This means that if a users don't scroll all the way down, images placed at the bottom of the image won't be loaded. A lot of companies use this. My own data research company that I work for do this exactly with all of our analytics, because it takes up too much time, too much bandwidth, and too many resources to be able to load all the dashboards or charts that are needed that these companies are building out. You'll see here's a great example of what my company does also. You'll see this loading sign down here at the bottom. That's an example of lazy load imaging. People will do this. I like this to show that it's loading more than it's having a problem. I don't like the blurry effect. I like to know something's loading. It can take a little bit longer depending on the data set that you're attempting to load. By default, lazy load assumes the URL of the original high resolution where it can be found in the data source attribute. You can also include an optional low resolution placeholder in the source of the attribute. You'll see that here that I've given examples. I didn't put them in an actual text editor, but here's just an example that I gave. Image class lazy load data source equals image / example.jpg. I set the width and the height to 765 by 574 and image class as lazy load. I then am calling the image here image source, or the source directly. It's not an image source, it's just the source, because we're going to go ahead and load this lazy. You'll see the data source. This is the big part, data source image example.jpg. You need to make sure that it says data-source equals image source / example.jpg. If you do not set the data source, it will not be able to do a lazy load. With the HTML in place that you have set, you can initialize the plugin by using that factory method as I showed you. If you do not pass any setting or image elements, it will lazy load all the images with that class of lazy load. I like this personally because this will mean any picture on your website will load with lazy load. If you prefer explicitly, you can pass on elements to the factory to use this example if you don't for different class names. Like this one below, it says let images equals document query.selector all. This is just an example that I've put in here. If you prefer, you can also use the plain old constructor, let images equal document query selector all dot new lazy load images. You can do it that way, but I think in most scenarios that most people are going to be using the main lazy load for all of their images, so it makes it faster and uses less bandwidth and resources for their company's images or data, or their clients' data and images. It's just a faster way. It's a better processing. That's really what lazy load imaging and progressive image loading are. I do thank you for your time in watching. This is the end. Again, my name is Taylor DeBray, and I appreciate you for watching. Thank you, and have a great night.